Hello everyone, my name is Boon Hui from the Institute and welcome to another installment of our series of video conversations with Singapore artists, state of the arts. Today I'm here with artist Chen Yanyun.
Hey.
Hello, Yanyun.
Hello.
Or Dr.
Hi,
Chen, so I call you
no.
Yeah. It's very interesting that you are both a practicing artist, who's returned back to Singapore after several years abroad, but also you have an academic career as a teacher at the university. How do these two different sort of trajectories work for you? Do they inform each other or are they completely separate?
So I would say that my journey has always been a series of questions, and how I fell into the arts, how I fell into academia was me trying to answer some of the questions I had. When I felt I reached a point in my animation sort of learning journey where I needed to push the limits of what I could do, I would go seek some kind of school that could to teach me, ways I could actually develop myself and level up. So I ended up in a classical atelier. I was good at doing what I was doing, but it was very hard to talk about it. And then I realized, I think I need to find words. I actually need words in my life now. And so I ended up going to a philosophy school to try to find another way of telling stories. And so I guess it just evolved from there, having this background, having had these experiences. Now I was kind of thinking about what do I say to someone else? I landed as a teacher. And then the questions evolved again. So it's been an ongoing journey of questions.
And I want to pick up on something you said. It was very interesting because you're an artist, and of all artists, a lot of your work is around drawing, but you were never, in terms of art education, you never trained formally in art school for that, right? You were saying you were studying animation and philosophy. So how did that, how did you go from there to, a drawing practice?
I was very good at mathematics and very good at art. Like, it was just these two things. And
it's an impossibility.
I know. But it made sense because to me, both of them was like solving puzzles, just different types. One's a visual puzzle and one's a mathematical puzzle. And I decided that it was going to be one of these two that I'm going to start dedicating my time to. So I made a bet. I made a bet and I said, okay, I'm going to do art. Until art rejects me, like completely rejects me, and I can't do anything more in any sort of dimension, I'll go back to mathematics. So far, it's been like, it hasn't rejected me yet, and I don't think I can count anymore, so I think I'm stuck.
But how did your drawing practice start, since you were formally trained in animation and philosophy?
School of Art Design Media just started out, so I was from the first batch. And that was kind of the only, at that point, I believe, the only degree in the arts in the university setting. So I kind of fell into it. And I had this mistaken idea that because they didn't have an illustration degree, which that was what I was interested in, they had an animation degree. So I thought, well, it sounds like moving illustrations, right? Yeah. So I went to do an animation degree. And that's how I fell into it. Through the practice of animation, you do a lot of drawing, you learn a lot about movement and the duration of time and the splicing of time because, animation is a series of images that are moving at a certain speed. I kind of really enjoyed the process of making these incremental changes in an animation that could, when you played it out, it moved, it became alive. There was a lot of power in that, where something just flat can suddenly become a very lively and emotional thing. And when I hit the upper limit of my drawing abilities, I was like, that's it. I need to learn how to draw properly. I don't know what that meant. But then I fell in love with the use of charcoal and this kind of classical sight-size technique. So this drawing practice evolved into this obsession with material, with techniques, with movement, with incremental changes. And also, it's a very strange thing, right? In animation, the whole idea is you have to draw fast because it takes so long to do even a single second that you cannot waste time. It's about efficiency in the image. How much life can you put into the fewest lines you can do? Well, classical traditions is the complete opposite. How much time can you dedicate to the one image? How much of the atmosphere, the light, the life can you imbue into a single layer.
Maybe that's why it's called still life.
Possibly.
You speak about animation as a kind of durational.
Yes.
You're capturing a kind of sequence of life.
Yes.
Or moments in life. And I think your images, particularly your images of flowers and bouquets, immediately we begin to understand why, even though they are supposed to be still life and they are still singular images, yet you feel like some of the flowers are wilting, you feel because actually they are not still life in the sense that they are not about capturing a moment. Say a little about how you actually draw.
So what happens is, at that point when I came back to Singapore, this was 2014, I was broke. I went studying everywhere and I was very broke. And I couldn't afford to hire a life model.
Yeah.
And so I thought, what would be the next best thing I could use? And that was kind of a life, but very still. So I bought a kind of just a small bouquet of flowers because I realized, this is alive, you know, but it's also very still. It's kind of classical tradition, and I can afford this. And when I started to do my first drawing of flowers, still lives, I suddenly realized, oh my God, flowers move a lot. They move with the sun, they move with the water conditions, they just do not behave.
And they die.
And they die very quickly. And for someone who had spent a year working on a drawing for 6 weeks, having only 4 to 5 days on a single drawing was like a panic attack. So it sort of gelled what I was doing for animation and what I was doing for classical training together. And as you sort of chase the movements of a flower through 4 or 5 days, I realized that it feels like a chase, that you're really rushing and running. Before it completely just wilts apart. And I loved that chase, and it was also about seeing how much I could get on a single page. So I started to realize that the drawings that I was making is like a collection of time. A collection of time of this thing, this living thing. And it was also really morbid because I'm just watching things die constantly. So it was a very weird position to be in, but it also made me really appreciate looking at the nuances of change, and also the acknowledgement that things will wilt and decay.
That perhaps is what the disquiet that the viewer sees, because they are also painted in a very realist style a lot of the time, but yet there's something very, very odd about them.
It's also quite fun because I realized that the most famous Flemish paintings, they're all in color. And I love charcoal. I just love everything about the material. And at some point, seeing a floral arrangement in black and white, you see that more in photography, but not in actual like fine art, kind of classical drawing and painting techniques. So I thought there was something special about that. And it was also the idea that you're drawing a plant with a dead plant on a dead plant. But it's also a preservation of time. Because when you use something that's dead and preserve a moment in time of something that's alive on something else that's dead, it's like a compression, like a sandwich.
Well, also because you have to stop. I mean, the physical limit is when the flower disintegrates completely, right? So literally you are, in your images, you're really sort of crystallizing the life right to the limit, right, of that object.
And I would really stop the moment they are completely built up. I just stop drawing and then I let it go.
So I think there's something very conceptually, very, very compelling about that. It's less about, if we say, still life, it's less about the stillness than more about the life, because you physically end at the moment that life sort of ends, and what we're seeing is actually not death, it's life. I also recall, like in that period, that series of flower charcoal paintings, you also had works that sort of vaguely look like Chinese ink brush techniques, which are a little bit more impressionist. Say a little bit more about how that came about.
A lot of the classical techniques involve a very, very dark and black background. It's like almost like something trying to emerge from the dark, or at least you're getting towards that direction of trying to make something reveal itself. And then when I was reading up and just learning about Chinese calligraphy, there was a lot about the whites. They talk about the empty spaces, the negative spaces.
The liu bai.
The liu bai. And I thought that's really interesting because for the Western technique that I was taught and what I was practicing, it was about, creating the shadows so that the light comes out. It felt to me, when I was practicing, like the opposite. So I just got curious about this idea. And I was also trying to push the limits of charcoal. And this is a very strange and random story. But I use a very specific charcoal. It was the same one I was using in school, and I just loved it so much. And there's only one place that you can get this, or rather one place that makes this, and I would just get it from them. When I came back to Singapore, nobody sold this charcoal. I couldn't get it here, and nowhere in Asia as well. So I ended up calling the suppliers, like the ones who make it, and said, "Can you just send me in bulk? Can you just like give me this charcoal, please?" And so I ended up buying it in bulk by myself.
Yeah.
And one day I got an email from the Nitram, that company, saying that their kiln has burned down. The one kiln that makes this charcoal has burned down, and they have no supply for 1 year.
It is that specialized.
Yeah. And I panicked. And so being neurotic and also being very precious about my material, I had collected all the dust that I had shaven to sharpen my charcoals all through the year. So I have these buckets of dust.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, time to use this supply because I need to just try to extend my materials as long as I can. So I started to mix materials in the dust. So I would use acrylics, I would use water. So evolving the idea of charcoal from a dry
That's where the
to a
acrylic
wet.
came
Yes.
from.
And that gelled very nicely with the kind of Chinese techniques, I would say, that I was looking at. And that's where that whole sort of evolution happened. It was out of necessity.
Okay. But I mean, the feel is very completely sort of different. You know, they are lighter.
Yes. For those works, I actually used the poppy flower as the model.
Yes.
Because I realized that you cannot actually ship poppies. The moment you pluck a poppy, it dies. You can't.
Oh, really?
You cannot export or import
That's
poppies.
really interesting.
The only time I encountered poppies was in a field somewhere in Europe when I was walking around. And you just have to appreciate them there at that point. And there's no way to bring it with you. And so I started to say, okay, if I'm going to do this technique, then I want to look at flowers that you can't carry. You can't bring with you physically. You just have to capture that moment in your mind and sort of like conjure it up when you're working. So that whole set came from this kind of inability to take something and just the kind of mythologies behind plants, like, you know, what kind of meaning, what kind of spirit do we imbue in flowers. And this mythology, this idea of investigating myths and legends and stories sort of grew from that research as well.
I think it's very interesting how you are playing with forms that carry certain meaning in their culture and their history, but, you know, juxtaposing them together or just blurring the sort of, you know, general perception of that. So, you know, while you're known for your 2D sort of work, particularly your charcoal work, you've also done works of installation and I remember the work at 8Q, which is on the installation with the images on scars like keloids. What sort of difference is there in you working with a pictorial image and a kind of three-dimensional space?
That was a huge jump. 8Q show was a challenge. It was a shocking challenge.
It was a room.
Yeah, I was like 15 meters. You have got to be kidding. What am I supposed to do with this? So it really was the first time. But I remember when I did my very first show, it was at NUS Guildhouse. So it was not even in a proper gallery space. It was just along the walls of some building that I was very fortunate to have been invited. They gave me a shot. And strangely enough, that was the year that Alfredo Jar came to Singapore.
Oh, really?
And I had known him from my schooling days, and he came to see that show, and I was so embarrassed. Like, it was my first show, you know, at this weird guildhouse.
Guildhouse, you can
and then
eat
Alfredo
something
Jar
along the way.
comes and looks at the works that I'm like just really shy about. And he really spent at least a minute or two on every single work. He looked at it very carefully. And I remember him asking me a few questions. He gave me one question, which was, have you thought of the space? And it shocked me. I was like, no, of course not. I mean, I didn't really think about it at all because this was an invitation to put stuff on the wall. And so that question sort of really carried with me all the time now. And when SAM, the opportunity arrived, I was like, right, now, what does it mean to be in this space? What does it mean to be in 8Q and Singapore Art Museum and the institutions of art in Singapore? And I'm quite foreign to the contemporary art scene at that point. I don't come from the art school, I'm from media school and philosophy school. It's very weird. I had the fortune of meeting very good mentors and artists who gave me just pointers. So I remember panicking about SAM. When I was in my whinging state, I happened to meet Ang Song Nian, who I'd known from back in ADM. And I told him like, so big, how? I don't know what to do. And he said, if it's very big, go smaller. And so I thought, what's the smallest thing I have? And I thought, scars, my keloid. It's been bothering my whole life. I might as well turn it into something. And so this combination of being aware of the space, and you know how nudity in institutions have always been a contentious sort of subject matter. So I said, fine, I'll do a test. I'm going to do a whole show about skin and body and naked bodies, but it's really a story about the keloid that I have and kind of keloids my family members have and their stories. The idea that a scar is a carrier of stories, and it's an intergenerational one because keloid is a genetic sort of, it's not a defect, but it's also not really a defect. It's like your scars.
It's a kind of reaction.
Yeah, and it's also the fact that your healing ability doesn't know when to stop.
Yeah.
So there's something poetic about it as well. So with that in mind, I slowly thought of the idea of a very classical Aristotelian 3x structure. 3 parts, a journey, but you have the exit the same way. So when you come out, it's like a platonic cave, right? You come out different. So that had to be the experience. And then learning to pace the images, like in animation.
But it was also like a, what do you call it? Like a forced visit. Like once you went in, you followed
you have
a
no
journey,
choice.
you have no choice, and you exit
the same way.
In the same way. It's quite different from, let's say, pictures and an exhibition where
you can meander.
You can meander. This was not a meander.
No, this is not meander. This is really a story. One of my painting teachers once taught me that images can push or pull you. So there is a play of distance with the audience. It's like a dance between the work and who's looking at it. So you have to effectively use it. So when I designed the space, I was like, at this point, I want them to be close and I want them to be far, or I want it to be far, but you yearn to see it close. So the behavior of the audience and the works comes into play. So in the second arc, where the drawings of the nudities in a far distance, and you can't actually access it because it's blocked off by glass, but people really wanted to see it. So they would kind of arch their body inwards and try to look at what's happening. But you're frustrated
by the way the space is structured. So I thought that was really interesting, and it really was an installation. It was not a specific hang of your images. And it was the first time I had seen you present your images in that kind of way, to create a kind of elastic space, you know, because that room is literally a classroom, right? I mean, you can't run away from the fact that it's a classroom, but the kind of compression that you got, it was quite memorable when I went, and I have to say I completely did not expect that work from you. In fact, I remember leaving and said, what is she going to do next? after showing us all the keloids and scars. You know? So,
I mean, I was testing hypotheses in the show. There was beyond the art making process. One, can we possibly show nudity without censorship? Can I draw on metal? You know, steel that is constantly rusting? Can we have a full wall of text in an art installation, which people generally say don't do because no one has the patience to read through it? There were a lot of can we do this that I just went for and tested out in the show. And I was very thankful and glad that I could like paint the walls black, you know, carve this weird space out and argue for a lot of things that generally curators will look at me and go,
because they aren't sure
like,
what exactly is going to be the final kind of result. But it was interesting because clearly there was a lot of emphasis on process and sort of just playing with what's available and without being too obsessed with what is the final kind of object, you know?
Yeah. The next one I had was grey projects. And the grey project space felt so cozy. It's like a, kind of the old HDB,
small
very
space.
tight, small, but feels also very homey.
Yeah.
So then I started to pair the kind of stories that I have with the space. So that was the story of a woman and her dowry, and we are sitting on actual dowry objects right now. This is my grandmother's dowry objects. And so what does it mean to own a dowry object? You know, when I don't buy into that kind of tradition anymore, the idea that a woman can have a value in that sense of an object value and that can be exchanged in the process when she leaves her maiden home. Like I find that very uncomfortable for a contemporary person. And obviously my grandmother and we have a lot of tension because of this. So I started also thinking, what does it mean to own these objects? What does it mean to sit on something like this, you know? And so it's a lot about my sort of relationship with material and the things that I own by accident or like, you know, things I encounter. And also trying to merge the floral and the bodily to find sort of areas where they speak to each other. Because for a period of time, it was like the floral stuff was the floral stuff and the body stuff was the body stuff. And trying to find a convergence and sort of reanimation of all these topics that I was concerned about. So that's what my works have been evolving towards. So is it a dimension of time in terms of the change of a body? Is it a question of the skin? You know, the skin of things, skin of images, scars of images, scars of time. So I play a lot with these words and also try to find how I can pull out some interesting combinations or tensions that uses these two sides of my practice, as well as my animation practice and my writing practice to kind of evolve in.
Done animation since then?
Yes, I have. I've done quite a few. The most recent one is at Thailand Biennale right now, called Furious Fires. And they are really small, like couple of second clips of very weird storytelling about plants, you know, whether it's like artificial plants laughing at real plants. Yeah, I know. Also, this relationship that I have with plants, having been in quarantine or during the lockdown period.
What was interesting is suddenly the sense of time is different, right? I mean, having, for example, a pet, a cat and a dog, the experience of time is quite different from literally watching a plant grow, a shoot grow.
It's suddenly very pronounced, and suddenly people understand what you mean when you say, you know, you get excited about sprout. Like, it's no longer weird, like no one thinks of you as someone strange. They actually understand, like, I see. Or they get, when they step out of the house, they feel this strange moment when the rush of trying to do as many things as you can before the next lockdown. You know, and then you go into this quiet again.
You know, no matter what the medium you use, I think in the end there's this thing about time and how we experience time that is sort of bubbling, you know, beneath the surface. Sometimes it erupts in very obvious kind of ways, you know.
I like to say that rage is my fuel. Like being annoyed or like getting angry, right? Rage is my fuel because it's endless, which means that you never run out of supply.
You never run out of spite.
Never run out of supply. And when it comes out as stories, I think it's very beautiful because then you sort of give it space to evolve and grow and also to let go of. You know, there's somewhere it can go. And I kind of like to think of everything as sort of a fictionalization. It's a story. Even though it's about me, it's not really about me. It's about a facet of myself or a story that I like to tell. And when you have an avenue like this, a lot of this stuff that's inside can come out, you know, strangely, but it can. And I like this idea of my practice as a storyteller. You know, even though I work predominantly with visuals or even in academic research, it has a space to grow and leak out and find meaning in by its own terms, you know. Yeah, so that's how I kind of like the way things grow and move and change.
It's like a British detective series, you know? They
murder
like Midsummer Murders, you know, very seemingly very placid, but actually there are all these eruptions and things going on, you know, behind even, you know, just serving tea. So remember, Yanyun is not a genteel artist.
Oops.
It looks like you are developing work for a residency, for the STPI residency. So of course, you know, they are really special in terms of the paper making workshop. So where has that taken you? What have you been?
So I've been there for the last 2.5 weeks. I'm still kind of surfing the high. And because I'm not a printmaker, never really done printmaking in my life, never really made paper, but even though I've always been fascinated by surfaces. So I thought it was such a wonderful opportunity to just dive into everything that they had and try to make something. And I went in with no theme, no topic, no real idea of what I was going to draw or make. But the sheer intensity of being there and of, you know, coming up with some strange question and someone would run off, somehow answer it and come back with something new. And then you ask the next question and it goes again and comes back. I feel like I suddenly entered a community of like puzzle solvers, like people like myself who just likes to have a question, then you kind of like tinker and come back. And I felt very nurtured in that space. And what came out of it was this idea that a lot of what we're doing is just moving or departing, and I like to think of it as departure, from one to another state. You know, a tree bark become fibers, become paper, become charcoal, become work. And how do you show this transcendence of a material? How do you show something departing? And how do you sort of treat departures? You know, what kind of gestures or touch, or how do you treat or carry someone who's departing? Which is also part of the floral practice, right? Witnessing is one thing, but how do you treat it? And so having had the hands-on experience at STPI, just sort of seeing and touching and thinking and asking things questions, I feel like I'm in a space where I'm really studying departures. So I think of those things that I'm making, and I don't know if it come as work. I have no idea what the outcome will be eventually. Okay. But they really are studies of departures.
As a drawer, you know, person who draws, that kind of practice, you work alone.
Yes.
Right, you work alone, but not in a print workshop.
No, not at all.
You surrounded by people. I mean, how was that experience versus you know, what you would do on a day-to-day basis? It
reminded me a lot of my postgraduate experience at European Graduate School. You're in a community of thinkers. None of us agree with each other. We're constantly like debating ideas, and everyone is kind of resolute in their own space. Like, I'm right, you know? So I felt like walking into a space like this, and at that point when I went to European Graduate School, I had not read a single book of philosophy. I have no idea how I got in.
Oh, really?
I don't know anything about Heidegger, anything about, you know, all the big thinkers, Western thinkers, because it's a continental philosophy school.
Yes.
And I just went in completely as this like visual artist who wrote a little text about Spinoza from an animation about Spinoza. You know, it's some random thing. But I felt it was such a nice spirit. Everyone at STPI at the workshop, they're experts at their craft. They know what they're doing. They know their field so well and so delve into the tradition of it. But suddenly you have someone coming and going, if we made the paper, but then we sort of work with the dimensions of the paper and then stuff it with intaglio and then stuff it with offset and then stuff it with stuff. They started to panic because they never really stack techniques on each other. So how do you find a narrative of traditions forced to work together? I think that was the experience I had.
So it's about, let's try it and see whether it blows up.
Yes. I like to do that, like push things to its limit, but in a quiet sort of way. It doesn't necessarily have to be violent, like toppling something or changing something, but you ask something, many questions, and you see what it gives you. Papers will react. You know, they all have their own different characters, and some of them will just refuse to let you do whatever you want to do, and some others they'll be like, sure, you know, take it, I'll do it.
It's almost like trial chemical reactions. And you see, rather than, you know, something that is there and you want to find how to get there. Whereas I don't think you start with that.
I have no idea where I'm going.
It's more like, okay, let's add this, let's blow this, let's burn this, and then we see, then something that happened. That's quite special for a very sort of formalized and regimented Singapore, you know, that kind of process. I'm glad we have an artist like you working in this kind of way. And what's difficult is, of course, when people look at your work, they can't really, it's not so apparent what is your process. So I'm so happy we had this chance to listen to you describe that, and hopefully our viewers, you know, when you next look at Yanyun's work, you will have the same questions in your mind, you know. So thank you for
having me.
Thank you.
Lovely.
It's our pleasure. We look forward to seeing more of your work.
Thank you very much.